I think Peter's sort of afflicted by that sort of the toxic masculinity of of what men should be 50 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, sort of against what the realities and infinite sort of combinations there are now of what a man can be sort of in a relationship. And I think sort of Peter is falling hopelessly between two poles there. He's only been on the scene about sort of 9 months, and it's Rebecca Staten who plays my girlfriend. It's her house and her son's house, and I'm trying to be some sort of stepfather to this son, and it's just, you know, dreadful. And the more Peter tries, the more it fails. And he then watches in abject horror as this refugee comes in and effortlessly becomes a family member sort of quicker than he has. Yes, he probably doesn't represent the best aspects of white middle class Britain. But yeah, in the show was sort of also, the one thing we decided early on was that just as with a refugee, you don't want your refugee hero, Sammy, to represent all refugees, because that's just unhelpful. And equally with Peter, sort of, although we were having fun with that disenfranchised white Englishman, we had to give it more of a backstory and more of a, hopefully a slightly more emotional kind of pull, with him trying to appeal to his son, his stepson, and trying to make his marriage work. So that there are real problems in his life, and that he's not just, but I mean, he's not just Archie Bunker, he's not just Alf Garnett. And,
yeah.
You know, that the stuff he comes out with tends to be just projected sound bites he might have sort of heard over the last few years, but which are really just, you know, really just flack for his real feelings. We certainly catch him in this series a sort of unhappy guy. And all that unhappiness tends to be kind of driven from his personal situation, a relationship that's not working. And Sammy's a sort of convenient punch bag,
yeah,
you know, to soak up a lot of that sort of unhappiness. Research was sort of, yeah, it's kind of almost like doing your scales musically before you sort of get in, because, you know, we are a comedy, and it's a you know, it is fictional. So you want to have the baseline of truth kind of underpinning it, but it's not a documentary. And, you know, so there has to be a sort of creative layer that you kind of put on top of these facts that you've sort of marshaled. You know. I spoke to, there were two refugees, particularly, who I based a lot of the writing on, a lot of the research on. One of whom, Hassan Akkad, won a BAFTA a few years ago for a thing called Exodus.
Yeah.
There was an extraordinary documentary where he filmed himself making the refugee crossing from Syria to Greece to England. And I managed to get hold of Hassan, and he came on board and was a permanent fixture of the entire production. And he was on set with us most days, advising on Arabic dialect and moments where the writer had hopelessly misjudged details of Syrian life.
Invented.
Yeah.